Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening wherever you are. Welcome to another episode of What's Up with Power. My name is Justin Wagner with Team ODZ. We are happy to bring you another episode of basic power training information. Even though I apparently have a cold, you can tell. Had one a couple weeks ago, got over it, and got it back. And it sounds like Taylor isn't doing so awesome himself. But we're here, and we're going to talk today about performing a season review. Maybe we'll figure out what we did wrong this past season that caused us to get sick. Who knows? So we've got about 3 minutes till the group ride goes live in Zwift. And we happy to have you all here. I'm going to send out some comments here to the group ride. We're live on Facebook, Twitch, Mixer, and the way this will work is we're going to have 15 minutes of teaching followed by 15 minutes of questions and answering. And so obviously if you're watching this and you can see me, you know where we're live at, but if you can hear me on maybe just Discord and you want to watch the slides, we are live at zwiftlive.com. Take you to our Facebook page where we're currently live. And give me a couple minutes to send out some messages so people know format of the ride. I think we got a good group. We got 30 people in the pen. That's quite amazing. Don't normally have that many. It looks like winter is definitely starting to take full swing. Getting more and more folks. Second, I'll switch from the chat here, live Facebook video, so I can see your comments. Kind of like managing a circus show here. Somebody once said, must be really hard riding a unicycle, typing, teaching, and teaching topics all at the same time. I'm not actually riding a unicycle, but it does certainly look like that since you can't see my handlebars. Okay. Got 30 people in the pen. Okay. Got 15 people live on Facebook. Okay. And we've got just over 30 seconds to go. So we're live. I'm going to shed this jacket. And have a drink of water. Okay. 10 seconds till we're live, or till group ride starts. I'm going to let you go. I'm going to bring Taylor on the screen, and the slides are ready for you. And you go ahead, Taylor.
All right, yeah, thanks, Justin. Happy New Year to everyone. Thanks for joining us for the first episode of What's Up with Power. You'll have to excuse me, like Justin said, I'm on the rebound from a little cold. I'm feeling better, but it's definitely still hanging around. So if I can't make it through without coughing or sound awful, you'll have to excuse me. But we're gonna dive in. We're gonna talk about performing a season review today, and so this is obviously the perfect time of year to think about going through post-season or your last season performances and using that to inform and structure the season that's ahead of us, the 2018 season and seasons to follow. So we'll dive right in. Justin, you can go to the first slide if you're not already there. So I like to separate my strategy into kind of two approaches or two segments. The first is broad strategy, so kind of bird's eye view approach. The second is a more detailed version of that. And so we're going to look at both. So for broad strategies, there's a few things that I like to do. And so, again, this is from the perspective of you as an athlete, either by yourself or with your coach, sitting down at the table and starting to look through the entirety of your 2017 training. So races, workouts, recovery periods, and beginning to understand what that looked like from both a qualitative and a quantitative perspective. And like I said, use that to inform how you train, and hopefully how you train more efficiently and more train better for the season to come. So first thing, like I said, take a bird's eye approach. Look over multiple training periods. So you want to look for long-term trends. Were you gaining FTP? Were you building your FTP through several different training periods? Were you setting peak powers for specific durations? Maybe setting 5-minute powers, training block after training block. Whatever that is, just start to look for any trends that may arise. Again, kind of on the surface of your training. And so once you do that, what I like to do is, once I've identified those trends, I like to then go in and look at key areas. So look for specific races. Again, peak powers. A great thing to identify and kind of single out is going to be those core PMC metrics, the CTL, TSB, ATL, any breakthrough workouts, any huge sessions that you had that you felt like really pushed you over the edge in terms of fitness or progression. And then segment those time periods out. So have date ranges in mind that you want to look at. And those date ranges and those periods of time are based around very key areas that you think are worth digging deeper into. And we'll get into that next kind of digging deeper stage in slides to come. Looking for highs and lows. So I like to not only look for areas where training was great or races were great, but also places where maybe they weren't so good. Maybe you felt awful. Maybe you didn't perform the way that you felt you should have. Those are oftentimes just as important, or maybe more important, than the areas where you felt fantastic and the workouts were going great. So look for some context around both kind of the high points and the low points in your training. And then lastly, just a note really is to be critical. I see so many athletes that it's really easy to look for the places or to reflect upon your last season and think that it went great and that you did the best that you could and that the training sessions were amazing and you progressed as much as you possibly could have, and that all you need to do is just to repeat that for the season to come and you'll be fine. Chances are that's not the case. We all know there's highs and lows. There's roadblocks and speed bumps along the way. And so being critical about those moments when it didn't go great and thinking through how you can apply some of your knowledge that you'll gain through a season review to make this year better. So we're going to dive into to actually what we're going to be looking at. So from a chart perspective or from a review perspective, for the purposes of this presentation and because this is the way that I tend to do it, I'm going to be using examples from WKO4. There's a lot of this that can be available or pulled out in some of your basic charts from Training Peaks as well, but there's a little bit more granular data available in WKO4. So I pulled aside some charts and highlighted some areas that I'm going to talk about. The first one is a PMC in WKO4. That's pictured in the slide here. The great thing about the PMC with inside WKO4 is you can overlay peak powers. That's a great way to see, again, kind of the macro trend. Are you setting peak powers when CTL is on the rise? What does TSB look like when peak powers are set? Are you in form? Are you fatigued? Looking at ATL. So again, kind of contextualizing what's going on in the buildup and the recovery periods from some of these peak performances. I highlighted a couple of areas here, just the way that we can start to think about these things. Later in the season for this particular athlete, a peak 1 minute power was set during a high point in the CTL in this particular build period. That happened to correspond with a focus on cross-country mountain bike racing, which is shorter and more intense. So we would expect to see peak powers for shorter duration. So this is perfect. It lets us know that we were kind of in the right realm, and we were performing the sessions that needed to be done to produce the efforts necessary. At the end of the season, we took a focus or shifted focus to more endurance or ultra endurance mountain bike racing. We saw a peak 20-minute power for the season in preparation, or rather during a 6-hour endurance mountain bike event. So again, what we would expect or what we would hope to see as we shift focus throughout the season. So this is the way you can use the PMC and some of these peak power numbers to start to get a sense, again, from that macro view, what's going on. The power duration curve is a really critical component, I think, of a season review. The way that I like to use the power duration curve is to look and see if it reflects the focus that you had during specific time periods. So you've in the last slide I talked about segmenting key areas or key time ranges. If the focus during that time period was an emphasis on FTP, then look at the power duration curve for that time period and see if powers in the 20 to 30 minute range are increased. Did you actually make a substantial or notable change to your power duration curve? Also, just in general, the power duration curve gives us a much more nuanced view of your strengths and weaknesses versus just looking at something like FTP. So we're able to see power on a continuum of time and see how the athlete performs over very specific durations, and again within very specific time ranges to see if we're on the if we're kind of in the ballpark. And then lastly, one that I really enjoy. This is just one metric in a sea of metrics that we look at, but time to exhaustion is something that I think is valuable to look at over time. Time to exhaustion, for those that don't know or aren't familiar, is basically a model of what you can hold or what you should be able to hold your FTP for. So it's a time range. It can go up to an hour because, as we know and as we've discussed on this show, FTP is technically defined as a maximum power for 1 hour. So whatever time to exhaustion is, and again, looking at that over time and seeing how that changes from, say, 35 minutes to 45 minutes, and as you get closer to an hour, gives us a really good idea of fatigue resistance. It lets us know how prepared for specific events you are. Arguably, the longer you can hold your FTP or the higher your time to exhaustion is, the more successful you'll be in any discipline of racing. So regardless of if you're a criterium racer or an ultra distance racer, time to exhaustion is something that's worth looking at. And again, kind of providing some parameters of how your training focus throughout the season impacted your resistance to fatigue. So I like to bring that one up. That's a really valuable tool or a valuable metric. Next slide. All right, so now we dive into detailed strategies. So we had the broad approach, again, segmenting specific time periods, training blocks, training focuses, and then using some charts in WKO4 to dig down and see what those ranges looked like and what those efforts inside of those ranges looked like. Now we're going to dig down and look at specific workouts and specific events. So what I like to do is kind of condense everything down even further. So within those date ranges that you've defined, look for key areas or key efforts. So breakthrough workouts that you think had a major impact on your training or areas that you felt really, really good. A, B, and C priority races, I think, are valuable to pinpoint. So whatever the event is or whatever the effort is inside of those date ranges, we want to drill down. We want to start to look at the data associated with those efforts. So I like to also segment not only from a metrics-based perspective. So again, peak power, CTL, TSB, all of our core metrics, but I also like to look segment based on races or events as well. So the great thing about segmenting from a metrics perspective and a race perspective is you can see if things like peak powers, peak CTL, when your TSB was positive, so when you were in form, if you overlay those segments, what you would hope to see is that the race performance and the metrics based review align, right? Are those things? Did you have your best performances on race day, and did that also coincide with the time when you were most fit or most in form? So there's a lot of value in taking both the metrics based approach and then also looking at races separately. Contextualizing the effort, just understanding why a specific effort and why a specific effort on a given day took place. So what I mean by that is, was it a hill climb? Was there a breakaway? Were you responding to a surge in the pace from your team or from your competitors? Why was it that you had to produce a particular effort, and really pinpointing what that meant for the day, how you responded to that, what that meant for your fitness, for the outcome of the race. So that's where that kind of, and I'll get to it in the next point, that's where the qualitative metrics come in as well. So we want to lean very heavily on the data, but we also want to make sure that we have a good log of the qualitative, so the comments, the feedback, how'd you feel, what was going through your head, comparing the data and the metrics to that qualitative aspect really is what allows us to get kind of the well-rounded, fully painted picture of a specific event or a specific day, and then the season overall. All right, so next slide. All right, so we've done all that. We've decided that we want to dig in. We've got the races, the days, the workouts that we want to look at. And now we're going to go and we're going to look at specific charts that are going to help us are going to help to inform the training that we ultimately write for the season to come. So the first one, and this is the example here, the chart is visual matches. So matches are basically, you can think of any given effort. We start with a match book. This is a fairly common example given now, but we start with a match book. We don't know how many matches we have in our match book, but every time we produce certainly an effort over and above FTP specifically, or typically that's going to be your VO2 max and above efforts. So your VO2 and kind of your neuromuscular, very top end efforts, that's burning a match. And so what we want to do is we want to train to have more matches, or the ability to burn more matches in that match book. So in WKO4, there's a great chart that allows us to see that. This particular chart is from a road race. We can see that it's a mass start, lots of matches burnt. The athlete puts out a big effort or multiple big efforts to keep up. We see in the middle of the race there's a big climb. This was part of the race strategy. The athlete separated himself from the group on the climb. And then we can see at the end is the finish, a big effort to kind of put in a gap, and then the athlete finishes strong. So again, this is one specific race on one specific day, and what that effort looked like. We know, again, qualitatively and contextually that that this was a race-winning effort for this athlete. So this is a really important file to look at. We want to see what it takes to produce those efforts and how we can use that to inform the training to come. So another chart, or another thing that I like to look for is pace change and surge analysis. So there's a variety of different charts in WKO4 that allow us to do this. But ultimately what we want to look for, or the things that I like to single out, are comparing things like heart rate TSS to normal TSS or power-based TSS. What's the difference there? Is the aerobic response dramatically different than the response needed from a power-based perspective? There's also a fantastic chart that allows us to compare pedaling power with a percentage of the time that we were coasting. So that gives us a lot of insight into things like form and race strategy, where there are times when the athlete could have been pedaling when they were coasting, or there are places where we could have been providing power or producing power that we didn't. So identifying, and this is particularly valuable from a race analysis perspective, we can look for those surges, big outputs in power, pace change, again, always compared against or compared in conjunction with that qualitative feedback. So, was the pace impossible to keep up with? Did you feel strong? Did you feel like you had the legs the whole time to produce those efforts? So looking for those pace changes and surges is a great way to help ultimately do things like right interval workouts and develop race day strategies for priority races in the coming season. And then lastly, interval review. So this would be like a fairly standard workout analysis or race analysis, where we're looking for things like percentage of time in your individualized power zones. So this is a great kind of the broad overview of workout level analysis, where we can say, okay, for a specific type of race, specific discipline, this specific course, that it took 30% of the time was spent, above FTP. So spent in zones 5, 6, and 7. We can see that, say 45% of that time was spent in zones 4 and 5. So whatever the case is, we can start to get a sense for that power distribution. And again, we're thinking about this as it relates to writing workouts that are going to prepare our body and alter and adapt our physiology for the rigors of the race schedule that we have to come. So interval review is just a great way to kind of get that base information to understand what specific efforts look like. I like to look at the interval review for different genres or different disciplines of racing. So if you're a road racer, you can look at it for a road race, for a time trial, and for a criterium, and that'll give you a sense for how you need to prepare from a training perspective for all three of those disciplines, specifically as you come in and out of priority races throughout the season. So hopefully that gives you an idea. There's a lot of information here. I know it's dense, but ultimately starting with a kind of broad overview, segmenting critical time periods, being critical, being hard on yourself, making sure that you've identified everything, both the good and the bad, and then going through and looking at specific races and specific workouts. And the goal there is to use that to inform our training prescription and the specific training blocks that we're riding in the season to come. So I'll take it back to Justin. I can't believe I didn't cough the whole time. That's amazing. But we'll go to Q&A and let us know if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thanks for the presentation, Taylor. We actually have one question right off the bat. We're gonna tee off. It comes from Kirsten, who has sent the message through Zwift. Says, "How do I know if I've had a breakthrough workout?"
Yeah, that's a good point. So I think it can be one of two things. The more obvious one would be that it sets it's a breakthrough performance in terms of power, right? So it's a best 20-minute power, a best 5-minute power, maybe a best 30-minute power. If you set a peak power, then that's a good indication that it was a breakthrough performance. Now, the more kind of nuanced side of that, and I think really just as important, is that qualitative piece. Oftentimes with athletes I work with, we'll kind of identify a session as a breakthrough workout, or a breakthrough race if we feel like the mental component of that workout was really, really strong. So maybe we didn't write the workout to be a peak power or a best performance, but we wrote it to be challenging in such a way that it really kind of it really worked on the weaknesses that we've identified for that athlete. So, maybe that's sustained power, and it's just kind of keeping your head right, or keeping your mental game strong during a sustained effort, or maybe it's a top end effort, whatever that is for you and for specific athletes. I think it's also valuable to kind of identify a breakthrough workout as a session that you've gotten through, and you got through that maybe you didn't or wouldn't have gotten through in the past. So I think it can be both very, very data driven and very quantitative, but it can also be a little bit more of a softer science, and you can identify that based on kind of how you feel, and there's a lot of value in that as well. That's a good question.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd maybe just I think you hinted at this, but most workouts aren't written such that they would cause you to have a quantitative best, right?
Right.
Unless it's a workout that's actually trying to like establish baselines, most likely going to be targeting some percentage of your power curve. So it's hard to say. I think sometimes from workouts it's hard quantitatively to see. It's easier maybe from like a race. You can definitely see quantitative results a lot of times from a race because you're not just sticking to a prescribed plan. You're doing whatever you got to do to stay in the race, and sometimes that pushes you to a new power best.
Right. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, I mean, usually you're not working out to maximal effort. So whether you're providing yourself opportunities to produce those efforts in training, um, or again, whether it's that kind of mental component. That's a good point, Justin. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I, I feel like probably more often than not, I identify breakthrough workouts in training as those big kind of mental barriers that we've overcome versus necessarily peak powers. But they do happen, and I'll put little touch points or little benchmarks throughout the specific training blocks to kind of encourage some peak powers and test the legs, and these little kind of waypoints along the way to make sure we're producing the efforts that we need to. And it's a great confidence builder as well on your way to certainly an A priority race, to be able to reach those peak powers before you get to race day. So you can kind of set yourself up for success as well.
absolutely. Yeah, I think the way I envision like the mental breakthroughs is like, let's say you're in the middle of a training plan that kind of typically a training plan will tend to repeat the same workout from one week to the next or over several weeks. And a lot of times like all your numbers from the workout the second time might be literally identical to the first time. But you knew and you felt like you could do it. Whereas maybe the first time you were just like, this is impossible. Like I can't even do it. Like maybe you just completely crushed your soul. But maybe the second time, you got through it and you're like, okay, I could do that. And so that's how I would see, there's that mental breakthrough where it's like, yeah, I felt like I could do it, and I went into the workout a lot more confident and held it instead of just being scared the whole time. Like, when am I going to fall apart? How long can I do this? Right?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. No, I think repeating workouts like that is great. Kind of put them in there. Certainly, especially or specifically the ones that are challenging, um, and take note of how you feel. And that's huge. I mean, that says a lot about your progress. If you like you said, if it crushed you the first time and you feel even mildly better the second time, that's gains. I mean, that's what
Absolutely.
you're going for.
Yep. Okay, so we're in the Q&A section. We're got a couple more minutes to take questions. Today's topic has been on performing a season review. There'll be a nice article going up on Zwift Insider shortly that'll dive into more detail on these concepts that Taylor wrote, so keep an eye out for that. We have lots of great content that comes through Zwift Insider, and if you have questions, you can feel free to let them fly in the Discord chat or in the Facebook chat. Also, if you happen to be watching the recording and you want to submit a question, probably the best way to do that is either head over to the forum down here at discuss.endurancelab.fit. There is a category for What's Up with Power where you can ask the question, and there'll be a post for every episode you can go in and just reply to and say, hey, here's my question this episode. Also, you can send us an email at WUWP@tmodz.com. So that stands for What's Up with Power. Also, we didn't mention Taylor's contact info, but let me pull that back up on the screen in case you want to get in contact with him directly. So his coaching platform is Thomas Endurance Coaching, and you can contact him at thomasendurancecoaching.com, directly via email at taylor@thomasendurancecoaching.com, and on Twitter at endurance coach, endurance_coach.
Yeah, Justin, I'll just add, you mentioned the article. So I mentioned a lot of charts here. I mean, all of the charts that I mentioned, obviously I couldn't put them all on the slides. They're all on the article that I wrote, and they're all annotated, similar to the ones that I put on the slides here. So for if folks want visuals of the interval review or the pace change analysis or any of the other charts, power duration curve, those are all highlighted and again annotated with some notes referencing kind of how or some of the ways that I've used those specific charts to do season reviews. So that might be worth checking out. It's a little bit harder. I know it can be hard to kind of me explain it and not be able to see an example of it, but for the sake of this platform, it was I couldn't do all the charts. So definitely worth checking out if folks want to see what that looks like, kind of with each specific chart.
Yep. And so if you're not familiar with Zwift Insider, just www.zwiftinsider.com. Probably just Google Zwift Insider and you'll find it. It used to be called Zwift Blog. They've rebranded and they're now called Zwift Insider. Anyway, woo! I feel a good cough coming on, so I think that's about time to do our sign off. Thank you everyone for coming. We've had an awesome session. We appreciate all you coming. Again, feel free to hit us up in the forum if you have questions or comments or anything about the show. We're happy to take your questions. And we're here every Wednesday morning at 6:30 a.m. Pacific, 9:30 Eastern, or this time frame if you're watching live, whatever time zone you are. So with that, I will say have a wonderful rest of your Wednesday, and we will catch you next time.